Real?
The live stream, so. We're live. Welcome everyone to our Women in DevOps hybrid event, The Rise of Serverless, Influencing the Future of DevOps in collaboration with Coding by Females. For those of you that are new to Women in DevOps, we are a community platform to help bridge the gender gap and inspire the future tech leaders of the world. Our unique platform has become a global movement and is used to not only amplify the voices of women, but all minority groups within DevOps and tech, to break down the barriers and drive positive change. Women in DevOps is powered by Tristan Soda. We're a digital technology recruitment brand with a key mission to empower and build diverse communities that represent the digital world we live in. We recruit within a number of divisions in the tech space, working across data design, marketing and sales, product management, and most importantly, DevOps. I'm thrilled to be joined by a panel of thought leading experts to discuss the future of serverless computing and what this can mean for the DevOps professionals in years to come. Throughout the discussion today, we're going to conduct some polls that we'd love for you to participate in. I have had to send the screen off quickly, only because otherwise our hands blind by the light. But if you go to www.slido.com and put in the hashtag WID October, that should take you to the polls.
There'll be a QR code as well that you can scan on your phone. We'll put up.
I'll put it up in a second, but just so that everyone's to set the agenda for the evening. So hopefully you've all got food, drinks. There'll be food and drinks afterwards. The panel discussion will be around an hour. We'll then do a live Q&A and then we'll wrap up with some drinks. I'm Francesca. I'm one of the co-founders of Women in DevOps. I predominantly look after the UK and Europe side of things in the community. We've hosted events prior, but they don't need anything but been to them before. But last month we had held the funding circle previously, with the likes of Condé Nast, Monzo, and the Financial Times. I'm not only passionate about growing diversity within the DevOps space, but creating awareness across the whole of the tech industry. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our chair for the evening slot.
Thank you, Thanks, Francesca. Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Siobhan and I'll be chairing our panel discussion this evening. I actually work with Coding by Females, who is delighted to partner with Women in DevOps for the second time on an event. Coding by Females, we are a tech non-profit. We are a community organisation that focuses on supporting Black women into roles in tech and also to thrive in their careers. We run various things such as training, boot camps, and short courses, mentoring. We have services to help folks to find jobs, and we've supported women from career change into careers in tech. And we continue to do that. We have about 10,000 members, almost 10,000 members across the UK and other parts of the world. And I will hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Good evening. I'm Emmanuel. I am a DevOps engineer at Mintel Group. I've been working with sort of cloud and especially serverless related things for the past 4 years. First as a consultant in Auckland, Scotland, before moving into my current role. Yeah, I'm happy to be with you tonight.
Hi everyone, my name is Bimisola Ojo, or you can call me Sola. I'm currently a cloud DevOps manager at PwC. I started my cloud journey about 4 years ago, so I've moved around a lot. My third organization, working as a cloud DevOps professional. So I started off in consulting, Accenture. I was there for about 3 years as a cloud DevOps engineer. Built several solutions on the cloud. I've used serverless. I've used virtual machines, built different solutions. And then I moved to industry banking, again, doing a lot of DevOps and DevSecOps roles. And now I'm back in consulting as a cloud DevOps advisory manager at PwC. I'm really happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Kanisha and I'm a platform engineer at Slalom. I started my journey into tech yesterday, a year ago, and after 5 months of learning, I was able to secure a job at Slalom and continue my learning as well as put it into practice. So I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. Thank you for being here. We're delighted to have you as well. And the first thing I just wanted to kick off, then we do actually have a question for the audience as well. So we're going to launch a word cloud. And we'd just like to hear what you are most excited about when it comes to serverless. And I will also direct that question to the panel whilst we do.
It's hashtag WID October if you can't scan the code.
So if you go to slido.com and then search for hashtag WID October. Maybe we start with.
Regarding what I'm excited about with serverless, I think the endless opportunities that will come in the future. It's a fairly new concept, and there's a lot of opportunities for people like me who didn't come from who came from a non-tech background, so they're able to get into the industry without knowing much code, so it's good.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really around the fact that it's very affordable, it's scalable. You know, when you build solutions in serverless, you don't have to maintain the infrastructure. As a DevOps engineer, like I'm going through the rigor of having to patch servers, like hundreds of servers, and having to apply patches on them, writing Ansible models to, ensure that your operating system is up to date, etc. So but with serverless, like you just need to write the code. You don't need to worry about the infrastructure behind it. So for me, I really like the fact that it's scalable, it's very versatile. It takes away a lot of manual effort in codes when it comes to maintaining infrastructure.
For me, kind of on the back of what Sola just said, it's more about the efficiency it brings. When you don't spend that time, doing sort of routine and mundane tasks such as, updating servers, AMIs, if you're in the AWS world and things like that, it frees you up to sort of do more creative things that maybe kind of, shorten your software development lifecycle. So things around, your deployments, automation, stuff like that. So it really I really like serverless because it lets you really focus on sort of the end goal of what you're trying to do and not so much of the noise around it.
Thank you. And we've got a few responses from our audience as well. So we've got focus on the main task. And we've got scalability a couple of times. We've also got efficiency and cost effectiveness. We've got a word possibilities, which is also quite a nice word. And we've got quick build for proof of concept apps. So really interesting to hear your responses there as well. Okay, so my first question here. So back in 2017, the serverless market was estimated at around $3 billion US. Now it's currently projected to reach $20 billion US by 2025. Clearly, it's an area of DevOps that is on the rise. And what are your initial thoughts as to why that's happening?
So for me, I think serverless is on the rise because I think the main driving point on it is just the sort of lower barrier to entry. So it lowers how much stuff you need to know before you can kind of start developing solutions and being productive, in the tech industry, as opposed to in the server world, you'd have to sort of know so many sort of background things, how to log into servers, how to set those up before you can actually start deploying and building solutions. And alongside that, you would always kind of have the training wheels on, because in a server world or in the sort of classic server world, it's just much harder sort of managing permissions of you don't want someone making a mistake and changing something into your live application, for example, because, a server is a server, but in serverless, there's nothing stopping you from, again, the AWS world. You can give them a sort of sandbox AWS account to go away and play with and, get comfortable with things before they start actually applying it in the real world. So I think just based on that, that obviously means that, things are getting produced faster. There's more labor in the market because people are getting, more conversant with it faster as well. And I think just based on that, demand and supply are driving up, so the market drives them.
Yeah, I think just to follow up what Emmanuel said, for me, with serverless as well, there are lots of previous functions that can be easily reused. So if you go to the AWS console, like you see many functions for many things that have already been created. So you don't need to start from scratch when you're using serverless. You can easily, combine different models and then build your own unique solution from there. So it makes it very easy to use and reuse. It makes it very easy for people to also learn the skills as well, because you're focusing a lot on the building the application rather than having to maintain infrastructure. So for me, I really like this. I think the fact that it has a lot of reusable models, it makes it, apart from freeing up, a lot of organizations want developers to focus on the core, what they're doing. So by the time you have any solution that is reusable, automatically saves time, automatically frees up time. And for me, those are some of the benefits, and that's why I think the market is really on the rise.
Thank you. So we've spoken quite a bit about how it frees up teams to focus on the code, and we've spoken about the time that it saves. Something that would be interesting to talk about is about reducing costs. So Tech Stephen published an article discussing the economics of serverless computing, and they highlighted how serverless can reduce costs in building and running software systems. Has that been, for any of you, your experience with using serverless? And how cost efficient can it be?
I haven't had much experience with the benefits of it reducing costs, but in terms of increasing security and decreasing the tedious tasks that a lot of engineers have to do, yes. I recently completed a ticket where I used AWS's serverless technology or tools, Athena and Glue. So I was able to turn the log data from CloudTrail into tables so that the security department were able to better detect malicious activity as well as suspicious login attempts. So this data would often be stored away and unusable, but with the help of serverless, they were able to use it and make their company more secure.
Yeah, I think definitely it saves a lot of cost. And the way I like to describe it is with traditional computing, right? What happens is we've gone from traditional computing to cloud computing and then to serverless, and the cost keeps reducing. With traditional computing, you're talking about, building data centers to manage infrastructure. So there's a lot of upfront costs. When it comes to cloud computing, you pay as you go. You only pay for the amount of infrastructure that you use. For serverless, what I find really intriguing is that you literally pay for, I call it pay for what you code, basically, because you're only paying for what your code is doing. You're paying per transaction, you're paying per line of code, so you're not paying per, even though cloud computing is revolutionary. You're still paying for the entire computing power, regardless of what application is running on the virtual machine. But with serverless, you're only paying for the line of code, you're only paying for what you've written in the application. So it really does save a lot of cost, so that's my experience.
Just to sort of follow up on that, so just to take an example, right? So if you've got a server for a simple website and it's serving a simple website that just says, hello, today is the 26th of October or something like that. If you've got that on a virtual machine or a server like EC2, you are most likely going to pay for that to run, continuously, because you don't know when anyone would go to that website, right? And that's a running cost because you pay based on how long it's running effectively. So that's a standard cost. But when you compare it to using serverless or like Lambda, so if you build, a Lambda function to do the same thing with API gateway and DNS in front of it, what you have instead is that your Lambda function will only run when someone actually clicks into that website, and the time it's spent processing that person's click is what you pay for, as opposed to paying for something, in a month, you're talking about 744 hours times, I can't remember the cost, off the top of my head, but that's 744 hours. So let's even say if it was $1 an hour, that's that, compared to something that, again, using that website, it'll take, maximum half a second for it to process that. So just considering that difference, really shows you how much cost benefit there is. And there's also, again, the scalability of you're not worried about if multiple people are clicking on it or anything, because eventually on the server point of view, you'd have to think, right, it's getting slow because there's 200 users, so I need a second one to support it. And then your costs have doubled. Or in the Lambda, the maximum you'd have is still pretty much the same for the time, but it's just that maybe there's multiple running at the same time. So it's still always going to be a fraction. So I think that's where the strong sort of example of how cost saving and serverless can be for.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting. Definitely that kind of hear a lot about this pay-as-you-go model, and that really kind of highlights that difference in terms of paying for what you're actually using and needing, as opposed to paying to keep something live all of the time. And even talking about cost efficiency, thinking about the time saving for the security team, that also has an impact, because that can have a massive cost non-benefit. I can't think of words at the moment. For a company, that can have a massive impact. So one thing that I would really like to touch on, and the kind of using of going on from something that Confluent have described, who are a software company, and they described that serverless works by being broken up into different functions. How can this benefit DevOps professionals, particularly those who are at a more junior level?
So if I was to take that, it's just more around thinking about the different layers of an application, really. So for example, even if it's something very basic of, I want something that at midnight, it should send an email to my manager. In a server, you'd have to configure a server, do everything with the AMI or the operational parts of it, before you then write whatever scripts to send the actual email, and you're going to maintain that server continuously. Now, for someone junior, for example, a company is not really going to just quickly allow you access to the whole server. And like I mentioned before, it's quite hard within a server to sort of break up permissions and things like that, because the idea is if you're on a server, more likely than not, there's other damage you can possibly do. But in a serverless world, you have, for example, in AWS, you have services dedicated to certain things. So if you're building that same or trying to solve that same problem of at midnight, I want to do something, you've got something like AWS Event Bridge, which asks you, okay, what do you want me to trigger at this time or we give me a time, if it's every day at 12, if it's once a week, you just focus on that for Event Bridge. It also gives you a kind of clear boundary, so you can fully test that event to make sure that, right, this is doing exactly what I want. And then you can focus on the other part of it of like, okay, does it trigger the right thing to send that email? So you can it also even makes it easier for people to work on the same thing. Because for example, in a server, if 2 people are on it at the same time doing multiple things, it could be, the classic too many cooks in the kitchen. So I think, serverless really helps from that aspect of kind of demarcating things and having services really kind of, focused in on one goal and one problem they're solving. And it's all about putting your effort into how you sort of combine them and integrate them and architect them, with failover and all your different priorities.
Okay, so we talked a bit about some of the benefits of serverless versus physical servers, and we talked a bit about kind of how that could be slightly easier for someone at a more junior level. It would be really interesting to talk about what some of the complexities within the serverless space are. So it's been highlighted recently that the complexities of serverless can be a key drawback for DevOps professionals. So in what ways can serverless be complex, and what could be done to solve this for future?
So when I began using serverless, you usually go online on Stack Overflow, Google, and there was a lack of documentation. So it was very hard for me to actually understand or complete the ticket. After several pages, hours, I was able to figure it out. But I think that's the main issue as to why serverless is so complex. I think a lot of engineers are very skeptical about sharing what they are doing, but it would be very helpful if they were more transparent about how they're able to combat the issues when it comes to building software, as well as the fact that there's so many different serverless technologies out there. So it's very difficult to try and grasp what everyone is doing and learning So, yeah, those are the things.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I feel like there's so many, and even with AWS, right? There's so many services, right? There's so many different options and how you can build and how you can architect. So sometimes it can get very confusing, AWS services, like, for example, this is just an example, CloudTrail and CloudWatch, that's something that people mix up a lot with AWS services. And because they have so many services and some of them actually have similar things. There are some, there are some services that can actually do the same things as other services. So I feel like just getting that combination right of exactly what you're trying to build and you're thinking about cost as well, it can get very complex. So I think that's the reason why. But again, I feel like, when we have more people sharing their journey, what they're building and all of that, we can even begin to have more reusable integrations, right? So not just the modular functions right now. If you have a well-architected serverless framework, that has worked for your organization, you can easily share that and people know that, okay, fine, she has used, AWS Guard Duty and, she's used this CloudWatch here and this CloudTrail here and she's built this particular system and it works really fine. So I feel like the number of AWS services, the fact that there are many services that pretty much some of them actually have, very similar functions, it can really get confusing, but with a lot of education and sharing, we can beat that.
Thank you. Really insightful. Thanks for sharing. So thinking about companies now and the adoption of serverless systems, so it's been found that 60% of companies that don't adopt serverless systems are predominantly concerned with how secure the model is. What are the current challenges relating to security and privacy in the rise of serverless? And can this impact the overall reliance of serverless for the future?
So on that, I think a lot of, high percentage of like the problems people have on, the security front of serverless, I think it's part of perception. I think, naturally as human beings, we believe, the more we control, the more safe something is. So the fact that, when you had physical servers, for example, you had them in your office, for example, you looked after them, you knew everything about it. People felt more secure with that as opposed to, when you have serverless, you don't even know where that code is really running. You don't know if there's always, people having fears of maybe it's being copied or something like that. So those are sort of the issues around it. And part of that is also, I think people just need to also kind of look at things like that and sort of feed that back into the development process. For example, in your code, you shouldn't have like sensitive data like personal identifiable information, for example. Like credit card numbers, things like that shouldn't be in your code. So that way you're not worried about where it's running. So I think those are things like that. Also, like AWS Lambda, for example, you have packages for like Python that are, sort of provided by AWS. Yes, obviously AWS is a trusted partner, but if you're being very cynical, you can say you don't really know what's in those packages. You don't know if the AWS SDK version you're using, for example, doesn't have any sort of malicious spyware in it or anything like that. So the security concerns in that point of view, but I think it's more about a control thing and more about focusing on what you do control and trying to use that to sort of build safeguards around it.
Yeah, I mean, just to build up on that, I think the challenge to everyone who wants to use serverless is just to think security as you're building, and I think that's what sometimes we tend to see security as something standalone, like you build your application and then you're now thinking if it's secure or not, like you're wondering about added security. So security is not meant to be like an add-on, So I think the challenge is just ensuring that upfront you're thinking security, and that's where even concepts like DevSecOps come in, and that's where they're like, so it's not like DevOps and then you're thinking security. You're actually putting security at the heart of the DevOps. So as a DevOps engineer, you're thinking security as you're building. So I think the challenge is just to ensure that if you're building your serverless solutions, I mean, there are services that you can use, within your serverless architecture to make it secure, and there are secure coding practices as well, just like Emmanuel said. So yes, there are concerns around, security of serverless, but again, we can beat that with, ensuring that you're coding securely, how you're storing your passwords, you're maintaining best practices, all of these things. There are many trainings on security, there are many training courses and many different, policies around how you build your solutions. So that's what I would say. Yes, there are concerns, but we can also beat that by thinking security as we build.
So now a question that I'm actually interested to hear more about. I've not heard this tiptoeing term before. Could the complexities and tiptoeing approach to serverless have an effect on organizational culture?
So, could you repeat that?
Could the complexities and tiptoeing approach to serverless have an effect on organizational culture?
Yeah, I think definitely. Because we live or we work in a space that is very dynamic. So more often than not, we're talking to other people in the industry and saying, what are you working on? And someone says, well, I'm building this really cool serverless app. I don't have to worry about patching AMIs. I don't have to worry about doing all these things. And then, you come back to your job and you're being told, right, go and work on that server and go and patch it, spend 1 hour doing that, and you're going to do the same thing again next week and the week after, and continues, So it's going to be hard for people not to at that point start thinking, well, this isn't as cool as what people I know are working in the same space. And that would, drain on your morale. You're going to obviously most likely speak to your colleagues about that. That's going to bring them down as well. Junior people are going to come in. They're going to, we've talked about some of the problems about being junior and dealing with servers. They're going to come in. They're going to find it a bit difficult. They'll probably hear from their other friends who got jobs elsewhere about how we're doing cool stuff and we're already being productive. So ultimately, there's a big chance that the morale is just going to drop. And tech is something that I think you have to have an inherent passion for, because there's going to be a lot of reading, a lot of testing, a lot of probably failures, of like things don't work out the way you want initially and you have to keep them going. So you really need that sort of extra 5% of just that morale and that passion of like, I'm really invested in what I'm doing in this company. And when that's not there, because your company is tiptoeing and saying, this is too new, we don't want to do that, you end up with, what we've seen, which is a high sort of attrition rate in the tech industry of people, jumping ship to startups, for example, who are always, more kind of on the cutting edge of technology, because they are really trying to be, innovators and disruptors in the space.
Okay, thank you for that. And as I was listening to you speak, it kind of made me reflect. I'm someone who am a career changer. I moved into software engineering in 2018, not having come from that background. I think one of the biggest learning curves was that getting comfortable with failure. And I think one of the things I enjoy most about tech is that kind of being out of your comfort zone and knowing that you're learning all the time. Because it can be complex, it can be hard, there are new things to learn, but just really liking that feeling of, or learning to like that feeling of, I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to try and find out and then realize how much you can that way as well. Okay, so our next question, so thinking about the software development lifecycle, how has serverless impacted the overall software lifecycle, and what implications does this have on architectures that are being built?
So I think with serverless, one of the things that we talked about again is being able to sort of focus on reusable modules and things like that. And I think because now we've had, there's now, less time spent in the serverless world on sort of more mundane tasks that we sort of touched on. It means that, I can now focus while I'm writing a piece of code and think, right, maybe I'm writing something that, copies images from one, server to another virtual server, or from one bucket to another or something like that. I can now spend time thinking of, right, if I'm doing this now, can I write this in a way that someone else doing it spends 5 minutes instead of 3 hours? I've got that extra bit of breathing room where instead of thinking, right, I need to get this out by the end of the week, I'm going to spend 3 days, pushing it through all the different servers. I can now say, got the full week. Maybe I should just, I don't know, use functions here, use this library, write a library or something, for example, publish it, and make it a serverless library as part of a framework. And then someone else is using that, they just need to give it input and build the job for them. So I think from that point of view, again, it's kind of taking that time and that sort of time sink in those sort of tasks in, deployment and server maintenance and things like that, and being able to sort of channel that into your process to make it something that, every time you do a job, more often than not, you are making someone's job in the future easier. And again, we're talking about, people coming in, new to the industry, new to the company. Sometimes you need things to be simple for you to get your foot under you, for you to understand what you're doing and sort of feel welcome into the thing. So when someone can spend that extra bit of time to put things in place like that, it really gives a lot of benefits. So I think that's quite important now. So, and the SDLs.
I've noticed that as well, especially with using Terraform. Terraform Cloud, you're able to have modules, and a lot of us will create a module and then it will be able to be used in the future. So it's just as simple as copying and pasting the code and changing the IP address or the role on so that it suits what you're doing. So it's very helpful to make your tickets go very quickly. And instead of just repeating what someone else has done, it's there already. So you're just filling in the gaps that are necessary.
Thank you. So at this point, we'd actually like to hear a little bit from our audience. So we have our first of two polls. So we'll just switch to slide. Okay, so we've got a question here. So if you go to slido.com and put in the hashtag WID October again. And so the question here is, does your current organization give you time to upskill in areas on DevOps? Whilst we're, I think, do you have something to add there? Whilst we're responding.
Yes, so during my time at Slido, we've been allowed every Friday, but we're allowed a half day to just do a bit on professional development. I'm not sure if that's the company, but that's mainly for people that started through the Build Academy, and that's been very helpful. I'm constantly doing different tickets, but it's good to have at the end of the week that I'm able to learn and just go over things that interest me. So I'm able to complete my certificates in that time.
Fantastic. And very happy to see that we've got a lot more yeses than no's. So it does look like there is time being given by organizations, which is really good to hear. And we've got no and sometimes coming back. Okay, great. So moving on to another question. So a recent tech consultant explained how there is a potential skills shortage in learning serverless computing. As a result, there are very few funded startups using serverless. In what ways, in your opinion, can organizations support their employees to upskill within the serverless space?
I think through virtual classroom programs, so not everyone has the time to go into the office, that may be the case, or to attend these. So it's good during like the workday you're able to attend a virtual classroom. Also interactive games. AWS have a skill builders game, which really helped me with getting my cloud computing practitioner's certification. So I was able to play the game and you're essentially navigating through the town, completing different tasks. So you'd be setting up a VPC or an EC2, and it's all in a game aspect, which is really good.
Yeah, I think what I'll add to that is definitely a lot of organizations need to be open to actually investing in people. So there's a part of investing in people who are already in the organization, and there is also getting more people into the pipeline as well, So, and I know that there are lots of efforts around that. There's AWS Restart program and a couple of programs like that that basically train people from scratch and put them into jobs. So apart from that, I would say that organizations also need to be open to giving room for people to fail forward, because when you're learning on the job, you can't take away the part of failure, right? On the path to learning. And I feel like some organizations are just not patient enough. They want people, every organization wants experienced hires, people that already know this thing. But I mean, it took a while for them to get there, so I feel like organizations need to be a lot more receptive to training people, giving them time to study, also allowing them to fail on the job, to learn and grow.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just like we we're talking about, it's all about having the time, giving people the time to be able to upskill. I think Kanisha mentioned everyone has different ways of learning, right? So giving people that time means they can go and watch courses, or they could actually say, right, I don't know, I saw Dave or whoever on my team doing this last week. Can I try and do that, in my own space and see, if I fail, and have them check it and see, if that's something new skill I can get. So something like that is important. And, sort of talked about, people being able to, fail. And that's all about creating a safe environment as well within your organization, where it's okay to fail in the right circumstance, create environments where people can, play with things and tear it down, like sort of sandbox environments that are, sort of ephemeral, that can just, go and come and no one really misses them. Because once people can do that in a very safe space, then, you kind of build the skill of, I always say that when you've broken something, you remember it a lot more than when you got it right. So when people have that opportunity to actually break something, and, there's no sort of that, pressure and timeline of like, you need to get it fixed, you just keep trying different things, and eventually you get it, almost like a sort of video game as well. And I think that's how, people grow. So I think it's really about making sure that that sort of safe culture is built, and it's built into everything you sort of set up in your organization.
Thank you. And that actually leads nicely into our second poll of the evening, which actually came up as a question sometime around the table last week. And I was quite curious to hear. I've been in environments where it was a very open learning culture, and it was quite easy to go to Dave and say, hey, could you sit with me for 5 minutes to talk through this thing? So curious to see, would you feel comfortable in that scenario? Would you feel confident in asking for feedback in your team? Or if you saw, in this example, do something, would you feel confident approaching someone in your team to say, hey, could you walk me through how you did that? So many yeses and very little no's sometimes. That's definitely good to see. Okay, so thinking about some of the training around that, so I mentioned this when you were speaking, you were talking about certifications and things like that. Was interested to know from the panel, have you found any value in any big initiatives or accreditations? And programs which are current tips?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I think for me, a lot of my learning was on the job, right? I mean, most of what I learned about cloud computing was literally on job, and I feel like I was definitely very lucky to have the opportunity. I mean, someone took me on board without skills and they gave me the opportunity to learn on the job. But of course, that's not the case for most people, right? I know there are lots of trainings and lots of boot camps out there, but I mean, I recently started one last year out of the whole passion and drive for helping people, because I knew how difficult it was for me to learn on the job. So I run an academy called Academy. I've been around for about a year now, training people. That was one of our graduates in the room. she went through our program, and she now works as a cloud platform engineer. So called Cloud Academy. We're going to send details about it after the call. And of course, there are other ones as well. There's Coding Black Female, there's AWS Restart. There are many. So like there's a lot of, I even heard of different funds available, like you could apply for scholarships on different platforms, just to get people, upskilled, because there is a huge gap. Like I'm in the industry, and most people that are in the industry, you see that we get contacted a lot by recruiters, and asking if you want to change job, and like how many jobs is one person going to do? So first, I mean, if you like to check out what I do, you can connect me on LinkedIn, but there are lots of platforms like that. So,
And I'll just do a plug for Coding Black Females, because we actually deliver AWS Restart, the program. We have applications open at the moment, which is it's for anyone who comes from any Black background and is a woman across the world. But sorry, they need to be based in the UK and willing to take a role in the West of England at the end of the programme. But we do also have others that are coming up. We just closed one, others in London as well. So you get that support to go through training, to get the qualification and to get the certification, and then we support you into finding roles after that. There's no charge to take the programme. So do have a look at that as well. Okay, so moving on to our last question before we kind of open up the Q&A. So thinking about the future of serverless, with the recent adoption of cloud computing and the talk of no-code computers, there could be a chance that serverless will heavily influence DevOps. How likely is this, and what are your predictions when considering other tools like Kubernetes?
So I think serverless is, I think it's here to stay personally. In terms of comparing with other tools, really, is that, for the past sort of 2 or 3 years or so, like what I've seen is any sort of application that's getting new off the ground, either it's a serverless app or it's a Kubernetes app. Kubernetes, fortunately or unfortunately, is still mostly on servers. I know AWS is doing some stuff with Fargate to try and get it off servers. But the idea there is that, if there's only Kubernetes as really sort of a competitor to serverless, that's already, a good sort of feather in serverless cap. And I think there's scope for Kubernetes as well to go into serverless eventually. I think it's just because, Kubernetes has such a strong ecosystem around it and, such a strong community of people, donating features every single day and things like that. So if Kubernetes, for example, were to sort of go serverless, then, you're at a point where pretty much every application is serverless. So I think even in Kubernetes that is server, specific, the sort of concepts and sort of methodology around using Kubernetes is pretty much the same as what you'd have in servers. It's almost like you aren't really interacting with the machines directly. It's more sort of an abstract sort of cluster setup, really. So I think, if I were to predict, I think eventually, Kubernetes will sort of slide more into the serverless space. And, I think that would be the sort of future of applications going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I feel like once there is a new technology and there's a lot of investment and, organizations tend to, and of course, people's concerns are being addressed. I mean, we talked about security issues, right? There's a solution to that. We talked about the complexity. There's a solution to that. So there's always that resistance when something new comes up. But once people get comfortable with the fact that, okay, even though it's complex, there are lots of training resources, it's easy to learn, you can navigate the complexity, then organizations become more receptive. So for me, it's brand new. There's a lot of advantage. It's still early days. I mean, it's still a couple of years. I really think it's the future because no matter how much you talk about the limitations, the benefits still definitely outweighs. And ultimately, most organizations really, really want to save costs. So when you talk about cost saving options, people will definitely be lower receptive.
Very much. Okay, so at this point, if there is anyone in our audience that has a question, so we've got a few, that is great. So this is an interesting one. So we've got the one at the top, 2 DevOps engineers need to learn to be software engineers in order to make the most of the automation potential of serverless functions.
Yeah, I think, well, I didn't start out as a software developer, right? I just went straight into DevOps. I think the key thing is to be able to think as a developer, because as a software engineer or a software developer, you're solving problems, right? So you just want to have that analytical mind. You don't need to come from a dev background or need to, have been a developer before you go into DevOps. You can go into DevOps, but as a result of being a DevOps engineer, you will have to automate. You will need to eventually learn Python and all of that. If you are from a software development background, you may have an advantage because, of course, you're a couple of years ahead. But for me, I just went straight from mechanical engineering into DevOps. But of course, I had to learn coding on the way. And once you learn how to think like a software developer, you're naturally thinking about, okay, how can I make this process faster? How can I automate this? Once you've done something once, you don't want to do it again. You want to write a code that would, if anyone else needs to go through that process, they can just follow what you've done. So definitely, you don't need to have that background, but I feel as a result of being a DevOps engineer, you will eventually fall into software development. You will eventually solve problems and you naturally pick up those skills. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And so we have a question here, which a few of you are interested in. So how exactly does serverless work? Where is the infrastructure?
Serverless essentially means that it's the cloud vendor or cloud provider that is managing the servers on your behalf. So that means that they manage the physical hardware, they have the data centers where the servers are being stored. You're just using it. And you don't have to actually manage or repair the servers. That's what the cloud provider does. That's essentially what it means. So technically, it's not serverless. You're just you're not making the server.
How's that? I don't know. How is that?
Okay, just for those who are listening on the live stream, so you said how is that different from having from traditional physical service?
Traditional cloud.
Traditional cloud apologies.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of it's a ladder, right? So you start from on-premise where you own the data center and you own the infrastructure, and then you go to cloud computing where you are renting that server and that infrastructure, but then you are still, going in to look after it. The only thing, the difference there is that you don't have it physically. You're still going in to look after it, to operate it, to update it. If there's problems with it, you still have to shut it down to create a new one. When you go into serverless, you take it that one step further, and it's not just the physical anymore. It's that those tasks are gone. All you're interested in is that I'm going to write this. I'm going to deploy it. It's going to get onto a server somewhere, and it's going to run. You don't have to think of in the EC2 sense or in the natural VM sense. You don't have to think on how I need to log into the server to actually put my code on it and then run it. You're just thinking, I'm just going to finish this, click here, and it's going to run. And that's taken away from you. So it's just that sort of love. That's the question.
Thank you. And so our next question that we've got is, what have any of your managers done in the past to make you feel as though it's okay to fail?
Just constantly reminding me that you're not going to know everything. So I'm a year and a day into my tech journey, but I don't know everything. I'm still learning, and just don't be afraid to ask questions, because that's what they care about. They care about knowing that, are you struggling? Yes. Do I need help? Yes. And they will take the time to help you through that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also not using your mistakes against you, right? Because that's something that makes you, because if you know that, failing and making mistakes is going to be used against you, then you're afraid to fail, you're afraid to innovate. So just managers reiterating that you're going to be you're on a learning, you're going to be on a steep learning curve, you're going to fail, and it's okay to fail, and it's not going to be used against you. It's early days, so just that reassurance that
I think if I was to add to that, I think there's just one thing that one of my early managers said to me, and it's that if I failed at a new level or as a junior engineer, it's not my fault, it's probably the fault of the people around me. So for example, if I deleted something really important, by accident, the problem isn't the fact that I did it. Yes, I made that mistake, but the real problem is, why was it so easy to delete? Why was I able to get there? So it was more about, a perspective sort of thing. And he always said, try and look at that positive aspect of the, situation. Yes, sometimes, it's intense and, you need to fix it, but thereafter look at the positive side of it. I was like, if I could do that easily, someone else could do it as well. How do we stop that from happening? And, that also helps me from a learning point of view, because then when I'm developing stuff, I'm thinking, right, would me 3 years ago be able to delete that? Have I put a safeguard in, things like that. So that I think that's pretty useful.
Yeah. So just to add on to that, I mean, this happened recently. My manager at work too, one of the things that he told me recently was that because I've been leading this migration project, and there's been lots of errors and mistakes and all of that. And he was like, when you're presenting, you just tell people that, I mean, if you tried it once and it worked well, then there was probably something wrong with it. Just clicking the button and everything just works fine. It means that, it means if that was actually what happened, it means that you probably missed out on something, right? But having those hurdles and those bottlenecks on the way, it also helps you to understand the nitty-gritty of the application you're building, nitty-gritty of all the systems you're working with, and what could potentially go wrong. So, I mean, now I become very suspicious when everything works out fine, because I'm like, oh my God, did I miss something? So yeah, just
I do actually have a little to add to this. From my experience, I think the two things for me around failure was one, when I was learning and came into an apprenticeship, I was doing testing and learning, especially with unit testing, writing a failing test first was really confronting, but actually got me comfortable with the concept of failing first and then figuring out how to make something work. And I think the second thing that was really impactful was being in an environment where people were comfortable saying, oh, it took me a while to understand this, or I still don't understand this, so I'm struggling with this thing. A really culture that's open to learning and to saying, I don't get it. That was also really helpful. So the next question that we've got a question here that says, many companies have legacy or monolithic applications and don't want to be vendorless. Do serverless and containers actually compete in the same space? So many companies have applications that are difficult to maintain and change, and don't want to be locked into one vendor. Do serverless and containers actually compete in the same space?
So when you have like giant monolithic applications, which is basically industry speak for this wasn't designed properly. A lot of people just want to sort of, the proverbial, like, if you have a tankless leak, you just take off every single leak. That's what people want to do with applications like that, so they don't want to change it. So in this space, serverless and containers are, always important because, they sort of are built to force you to refactor things into little microservices rather than a giant thing that does everything. Think of small things that do one thing each very well and let them talk to each other. So that's the first place to start from. In terms of being vendor locked, I don't think you are, because nobody owns the cloud. There's AWS, there's GCP, there's Azure. So you have different vendors, and these days, as much as everyone has their preferences, more often than not, they have similar offerings. So take Kubernetes, for instance, there's AWS Elastic Kubernetes Service, there's Google Kubernetes Engine. You can quite easily switch between those, maybe it'll take like a week of work or whatever, just to adjust a few things, but your underlying application is pretty much exactly the same thing. So you can quite easily jump across. I don't think you become vendor locked from that instance. Yeah, I think that's all of it.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, and I think a lot of organizations are doing multi-cloud these days, they're just combining Microsoft Azure and AWS or AWS and Google Cloud. So, and a script, a tool like Terraform, for example, you can actually deploy to any of them, any of the AWS, any of those cloud providers from the same, scripts that you have in Terraform. So, I think there's a lot of reusability and all the different platforms that you're able to move around very easily, just like what Emmanuel has said. So you don't become very a lot of organizations would have their entire infrastructure on AWS, and if they need to move all of that to Google Cloud, it's not so difficult. You can easily just automate everything and move across to another cloud provider. So.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll make this our last question, and then we'll just have a thought from the panelists to wrap up. So this question specifically for Sola. You mentioned being a DevOps lead. How did you find the transition from being an individual contributor to a management role?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think for me, it really started off by, from my passion of wanting to just mentor younger people, right? Because I struggled as a cloud engineer, not struggled, but I just felt like it took me a lot of time to learn all of the skills. So my transition actually started from when I started the academy, helped the academy, I started training more people, and I could relate to the challenges that they were going through on their cloud journey. And from there, I knew that I was ready for me to take on a manager role, which is what I'm doing at the moment. So the transition hasn't been I'm still in that transition phase because I'm just about 6 months in this role, still learning and growing. But of course, being able to just see how different people are and how people learn differently and different people work differently as well. I've just grown my adaptability, if I can put it that way, and empathy as well. So I feel like I can easily relate to people that are working with me. I can easily relate when they're struggling or, when they're going through challenges, because sometimes I've gone through that before. So the transition for me, yeah, I think it's just been a journey of empathy, learning from people, learning people's different working styles, and just being able to bring out the best in people. Because as a manager, that's really what you are, right? So your output is no longer dependent on what you can produce alone. It's not about the collective effort of the entire team. So my challenge has really been around making sure I understand everyone that is working with me, and I'm able to bring out the best and able to give them tasks that are suited to what they're interested in, and of course give them that room to fail and grow on the job as well. Just like I felt like people gave me the opportunity, that's why I am where I am today. So that has been my journey. It's been a lot of learning, of course, because it's really different, especially with technical concepts. You're used to just being able to do things on your own and just figuring it out, but now you have to wait on someone to actually get that right, and you have to be very patient as well. So a lot of patience, adaptability, empathy, and yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still very new, honestly. So yeah, it's still a journey.
Thank you very much. Okay, so to wrap up, a question for each of the folks on the panel. If someone were interested in getting into DevOps and or in learning about serverless computing, what advice would you give them, including consumers and stuff?
Yeah, just like we said, there are lots of platforms, right? You can join us at Cloud Academy, just follow me on LinkedIn. But most importantly, I would say try and build things. Like the best way to learn is by doing. So you can spend, and of course, people learn differently, right? You might be someone that is really put off by a lot of words and text. You might prefer videos, right? There are tons and tons of YouTube videos out there that talk about serverless. You can join a bootcamp if you prefer to learn people. If you're someone that enjoys reading, there's lots and lots of documentation on AWS websites around, different serverless services, but most importantly, however you gain the information, either by reading, by learning from other people, make sure that you actually try things. Like you need to go into the AWS console and actually build something. Just don't be intimidated, honestly. Like especially with serverless, there already, if you're starting out, you can literally just spin up something that someone has created already. And by the time you say, you can start with a simple BMI calculator, just something very simple, right? Try it and build your knowledge gradually. And I'll say, don't be intimidated, because I run a training academy. We always stress this because it can look very intimidating at the beginning, but once you think about the fact that there are many people who have gone on that same journey, there are people that have gone from non-tech backgrounds and have learned these things that will keep you going. And the final one is, don't be afraid to fail. Things are not going to work. The journey to success is never a straight line. It's gonna be, it's gonna be with lots of turns. So just that persistence, that ability to stay through the problem, and not be discouraged. Those are the elements that you need to really get started in Serverless.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I started out with QA, so I was working with them. And there's also good YouTubers as well. I think Tech Nana, she explains DevOps very well, Kubernetes, everything that we mentioned today. So yeah, definitely going online and having someone to assist on a weekly basis helps.
Yeah, I think just, those are, sort of foundations. I think I also put forward going after a certification. So like almost like AWS, all these things, Kubernetes, all these things have certification paths for a reason. I know some people don't like them because of the exams and stuff, but more often than not, you're learning quite a few things, and at the end of the day, if you're successful, you have a badge that you can kind of hang your hat on for a couple of years, and you know what you know. It really also helps to kind of build your confidence. That was something I found. When I was starting out, I was, sort of 6 months in, I remember just always being, second guessing myself. But when I had my first AWS certification, there was a bit of confidence that came with it, of like, I felt like there was a bit more weight behind my words, of like, I do know what I'm saying. It's silly because it's a piece of paper that says I do AWS, but, it did empower me in that way. And then also, like, instead of playing with stuff, like AWS now has the free tier, so you can literally just sign up with your debit card for an AWS account and do whatever you want. And no one's going to say, oh, you left this running or whatever. Do whatever you want with it, play with it. Even if it's just to, like Phyllis said, just pick up stuff that other people have done, break it, and then fix it. Just little things like that you can do in your own time. I think are exciting.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for sharing your insights and your experiences. It's been really valuable. And I will
Thank you very much. That was such a different one. Everyone got something out of that. And thank you to Salem for hosting us this evening, and to Coding Back for Mills and partnering up with us on this event. There is now it's like a 2-3 question survey, which is just literally not going to take like 30 seconds. If you can fill that out for us, just really insightful just for our future events. But that's it from us. And there's some food still left. There's cupcakes. There's more drinks outside. So help yourselves, and do networking for a half hour or so.
What did you describe? So you have. I think my advice. Now, what we say,